guess I would hope that, my story would inspire some people to just say, you actually don't really need to be qualified to, make an impact in the world. Charity Water has now helped about 5.2 million people in 24 countries get clean water. We employ over 1,600 locals now around the world on these water projects. And I didn't go to school for international development. I didn't come through the traditional path. When I was 4 years old, my mom became really ill with something called environmental illness, and there was a carbon monoxide gas leak in our house. Unbeknownst to all of us, we were breathing in these noxious, invisible fumes. And because I spent so little time in the house, I was at school, I was playing with my friends, because my father spent so little time in the house, he was working long hours and commuting to a new job, it really only affected my mom. And on New Year's Day, she walked across their bedroom, she collapsed unconscious. And after a long series of blood tests, they found these massive amounts of carbon monoxide in her blood. Thankfully, it hadn't killed her, but it had irreparably damaged her immune system, and she became immediately allergic to everything chemical. I was a happy kid. I loved life. Being an only child gave my parents, despite this illness, the ability to just instill a lot of confidence in me. And because I was helping to take care of Mom, I was also needed. So, what happened around 18 was just this cliche rebellion. It was something along the lines of, I've spent the last 18 years looking out for everybody else, helping to take care of Mom. I didn't get to have all the fun that my friends had. Now it's time to look after number one. Now it's my turn. And I grew my hair down to my shoulders. I joined a band. I moved to New York City to make it famous, and the lifestyle of sex, drugs, and rock and roll was very alluring. And really over the next 10 years became a prodigal. Picked up pretty much every single vice you can imagine. Moved from being in a band to actually becoming a nightclub promoter and climbing up the social status in New York. I wanted to be the king of New York nightlife. I probably got close to maybe top 8. But my life looked like one giant party. I literally partied for a living. I drank for free, my friends drank for free. We would sell people $1,000 bottles of champagne that cost us $60. After a decade in the business, I was 28 at the time, and we would every year go on this kind of extravagant trip, typically to South America. So we went to Punta del Este in Uruguay, and it was all of the beautiful people, and I remember my girlfriend at the time was on billboards and the cover of magazines, and we rented this amazing house with servants and horses, and there were magnums of Dom Perignon, and we spent $1,000 on fireworks. It was just this kind of, we've made it. We had a party for New Year's that lasted a couple days. And something really, it was a really important time in my life. So I began just kind of, reaching out again, I guess, to a very lost faith. I hate any of the churchy words, but I think I just realized that something needed to change, that I was never going to find happiness where I was looking for it. There would never be enough girls, there'd never be enough drugs, there'd never be enough money, there'd never be enough parties. So it's almost like the veil, was lifted a little bit, and I saw my life play out. I was gonna be the 60-year-old king of, nightlife if I reached it, and I'd probably look like I was 100 years old, or I might not even make it to 60. I might be, overdosed in some gutter. Later in that summer, after a lot of soul searching, I left New York. I rented a cobalt blue Ford Mustang, got out of the city for a couple weeks, and had grabbed, I remember, a bottle of Dewar's, grabbed a Bible, started heading north, and I wound up in Maine, just kind of aimlessly driving, and from an internet cafe, I remember it was dial-up internet at the time, kind of made this deal with God that I would try something very, very different for a year and see where it took me. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool to actually serve others, serve the poor for a year, and use whatever gifts I have to benefit others. So from this, dial-up internet cafe in Moosehead Lake, Maine, I start applying to many of the famous humanitarian organizations of the world. Scott Harrison is now ready to serve you and to volunteer for you. And to my shock, over the next few weeks, a couple months, I was denied by every single organization that I had applied to volunteer. I didn't even want to be paid. Thankfully for me, a couple months later, one organization, actually the only one that hadn't rejected me, was a group called Mercy Ships, and they said, Scott, if you pay us $500 a month, you can volunteer with us. And I said, fine, here are my credit card details, where are you guys going? And they said, we're going to West Africa, to Benin, and then to a country called Liberia, which I'd never heard of before. On our third day there, we had the patient screening. And for about a month before the hospital ship had sailed into port, a small advance team had just flyered the country saying, here are the conditions we treat. If you have a giant facial tumor, if you have a cleft lip, a cleft palate, if you have flesh-eating disease, if you've been burned during the war, turn up on this day and maybe our doctors can help you. And I'll never forget my third day on this mission. It was about 5:30 in the morning. I grabbed 2 Nikon D1X cameras, jumped into a Land Rover, and approached the football arena that the government had given us to go and see these patients. And I was so curious to see who would turn up, who would respond. It's like you're almost throwing a big party. Does anyone come? And I knew that we had about 1,500 surgery slots. And I was shocked to turn up and see over 5,000 people were standing outside this football stadium. I remember my heart just broke. It sunk in that over 3,500 people that had come with hope. Many of them who had walked from neighboring countries, many of them who had walked over a month just to see a doctor, would be sent home. Then it kind of got specific. The first boy that was standing in line, so imagine 5,000 people, there's a boy with his mother, and his name was Alfred, and he was literally suffocating to death on his own face from this giant tumor that was called an amelioblastoma. It was a benign tumor, and his mom pulls out a photo and says, my son, at 10 years old, was completely fine. And then this tumor started growing and the cells started replicating, and there was no doctor or surgeon to take him to. And I remember I lost it. I just started sobbing. I ran in the corner of the stadium. I broke down, thinking there's no way I'm gonna be able to do this for a year. And I signed up for a year. I had never seen anything like this before. Flesh-eating disease, people with, faces out to here. I didn't know that I'd be able to cope. Thankfully, one of the chief medical officers kind of came over and I remember kicked me in the butt and said, get back in there. You're from New York, you're supposed to be tough. A couple days later, back to Alfred, I got to see his surgery. I got to actually document it. And I watched these amazing surgeons just cut out the tumor, throw it in the bin. I watched him heal on the hospital's ward. And then a couple weeks later, they said, why don't you take Alfred home and see what it's like when a child who's been written off for dead is welcomed back into his family. And it was amazing. Hundreds of people came out, there was singing, there was dancing, and they kind of looked at him and they just thought he was a ghost. Here's this boy without the tumor, and he's a handsome kid. And on the second tour, I really began to learn about water. And the simplest way to say this is I saw people drinking dirty water. I saw kids drinking from swamps and from ponds. And it was just as unthinkable to me as someone with flesh-eating disease or a tumor, except it was a lot more pervasive. And I learned that over half of the country didn't even have clean water to drink. They just lived in villages where there was no access to clean water. And I kind of put 2 and 2 together and said, no freaking wonder everyone's sick. No wonder thousands of people are lined up outside football arenas if there's no clean water for them to drink in their villages. And I was constantly scrubbed up, talking about this with the surgeons, and then I'd be in these rural villages. I'd be, watching kids, drink water that was going to give them diarrhea and was killing them. And just became so passionate about that issue. To me, it seemed like the question behind the question of so much of the sickness that we were seeing. And instead of coming back to New York and wanting to kind of raise money or awareness, to build another hospital ship, I thought, what if I could kind of attack this bigger problem, which is that almost 1 billion people at the time didn't have access to clean drinking water. Problem was, when I came back to New York, I had no money. Nightclub promoters are great at spending money. We're very bad at saving money. So I was living on my old business partner's couch and said, look, I have this vision of trying to help 1 billion people get clean water, and at the same time creating a movement of generosity and compassion and empathy and reinventing charity and the way people think about giving. And he's like, cool, man, you can use my couch and do it here.